looks like you. Here's something uncomfortable to notice. You meet someone, and almost instantly, something about them bothers you. Not because they harmed you. Not because they crossed a line. Just who they are. Their tone. Their need for attention. Their defensiveness. Their lack of self-awareness. Your body reacts before your mind does. And here's what's strange about that reaction. Often, the brain isn't responding to their flaw. It's responding to a reflection. Psychology calls this the mirror effect. When you strongly dislike a trait in someone else, it's often because that same trait exists somewhere inside you, a part you learn to suppress, judge, or reject. Not consciously. Quietly. Think about the last person who irritated you for no clear reason. What was it about them? Their arrogance. Their emotional neediness. Their avoidance of responsibility. Their inability to be vulnerable. Now pause. Can you feel a trace of that quality in yourself? In many cases, that's the source of the reaction. It feels like anger toward them. But underneath, it's discomfort with something unresolved inside you. And here's the part most people miss. As long as you focus on fixing them, you never have to look at yourself. But the moment you stop hating them, something shifts. Not because they changed, but because the mirror no longer threatens you. As you fall asleep tonight, notice this gently. Who are you most reactive toward right now? What exactly do they trigger in you? And where does that same quality live inside your own experience? Law 2, social proof. The trap where your brain chooses belonging over truth. A person walks into a room, simple line-matching task. Draw a line the same length as the reference line. It's obvious, a child could do it. But everyone else in the room just gave the wrong answer, deliberately wrong, not even close, and they said it with absolute confidence. Now it's your turn. You look at the lines, you know the right answer. Your eyes don't lie. But everyone just said the wrong answer. What do? This is the Ash conformity experiment, and 75% of people gave the wrong answer, not because they suddenly couldn't see, but because their nervous system calculated, I am more dangerous alone than I am wrong with the group. Your survival instinct, the one that kept your ancestors alive in tribes, just told you that being right is less important than belonging. Think about how this plays out in your actual life. You're in a meeting. Your boss suggests an idea. You think it's bad, but everyone else nods, so you nod. Not because the idea got better, but because deviation from the group feels dangerous. You're on social media. Everyone's angry about something. You don't fully understand it, but the anger is contagious. So you get angry too, not because you thought about it deeply, but because your nervous system felt the group energy and matched it. Here's what's insidious. You don't experience this as pressure. You experience it as your own opinion forming. You'll think to yourself, yeah, actually, I agree with everyone. You won't think, I'm conforming to avoid rejection. You'll believe you arrived at this conclusion independently. That's the real power of social proof. It's invisible. It feels like choice. The paradox is this: the people who sleep best aren't the rebels. They're the people whose genuine beliefs align with their group. There's no internal contradiction. There's nothing to defend, so their nervous system can rest. But if you're constantly performing agreement while internally disagreeing, your body knows. Your nervous system feels the split. And that tension, that gap between what you really think and what you're pretending to think, keeps you awake. As you drift off, ask yourself, where am I performing agreement right now? What do I actually believe that I'm not saying out loud? Can I feel the tension in my body when I think about it? Law 3, consistency trap. Why you stay trapped by your own words. You say something small, you don't think it matters much. Yeah, I support that cause, or that person's a jerk, or I'm not a morning person. but something shifts in your nervous system. Because consistency is a core human drive. We don't just want to be coherent, we want to appear coherent to the world, but more importantly, to ourselves. Here's what happens next. Every decision you make, your brain checks it against what you've already said. And if your new action contradicts your old statement, you feel discomfort, cognitive dissonance. Your nervous system screams, "This doesn't match who you said you are." So you either change your behavior to match your statement, or you change how you interpret your behavior to make it seem consistent. Real example, you sign up for a local environmental cause. Nothing major, just your name on a petition. You didn't even really think about it. A friend asked. You signed. But something just happened to your identity. A month later, that organization asks for a donation, and you feel an obligation, not because the cause suddenly mattered more to you, but because in your mind you're now the kind of person who cares about the environment. That's your new label. So you donate. Then they ask you to volunteer, and you say yes, because now not volunteering would contradict who you've decided you are. 6 months later, you're a passionate environmental activist, not because you carefully examined the evidence and decided it was your cause, but because you signed a petition once, and your need for consistency did the rest. Here's what's brilliant and terrible about this. Consistency makes you predictable, and predictable people stop growing, because growth requires doing things that contradict your old image of yourself. Growth means saying, "I used to believe that, but I don't anymore." Growth means being willing to look inconsistent. But consistency feels safe, so we'd rather stay trapped in old identities than risk looking like a hypocrite. Now here's the paradox. The people who sleep best aren't the people with the most rigid, consistent public persona. They're the people whose actions match their actual, evolving values so perfectly that there's no internal contradiction. Not because they have a perfect image, but because they're not defending anything. They're not maintaining consistency. They're just living. There's no gap, so there's nothing to protect. And when there's nothing to protect, your nervous system can finally rest. As you settle in tonight, ask yourself, where are you defending an old image of yourself? What did you say about yourself years ago that you're still performing? What would it feel like to let that go and just be honest? Law 4, the Hedgehog's Dilemma. Why intimacy hurts. Two hedgehogs are cold. They huddle together for warmth, but their spines hurt each other, so they move apart. But then they're cold again, so they move closer, but then they hurt again. This is Schopenhauer's Hedgehog's Dilemma, and it's the fundamental paradox of human intimacy. You need closeness to feel loved, but closeness means being seen, and being seen means being vulnerable, and vulnerability means risking rejection. So you oscillate, you move toward intimacy. You feel safe, loved, warm, but then you get scared. What if they see something they hate? What if they realize you're not worth loving? So you create distance. You pull back. You become cold and distant. Now they feel the withdrawal, so they pursue. You feel trapped, so you push harder, and the cycle continues. Here's what's fascinating. Most relationship conflict is not about the surface issue. It's about this oscillation. You want closeness but are terrified of it, so you sabotage it, or you demand it in ways that push people away. The insidious part, you don't experience it as your own fear. You experience it as their fault. They're too needy. They're too distant. They don't understand me. But what's actually happening is two scared nervous systems trying to regulate each other while simultaneously protecting against harm. Here's the paradox. The couples who are most intimate are not the ones with the fewest conflicts. They're the ones who can tolerate the hurt of the spines. They understand that closeness requires accepting that you'll hurt each other sometimes, and they stay close anyway. But most people never learn this, so they spend their whole lives either isolated or in cycles of pursuit-withdrawal collapse. Tonight, notice, in your closest relationships, where are you oscillating? When do you move toward and when do you push away? Can you feel the fear underneath? Law 5, the spotlight effect. You're not the center of anyone's attention. You walk into a room and trip slightly. Your heart stops. Everyone saw that. They're all judging you. This is going to be awkward. Except no one noticed. And if they did, they forgot about it 30 seconds later because they're too focused on their own anxieties. This is the spotlight effect. Your brain makes you feel like you're on stage, like people are watching you constantly, judging, evaluating, when in reality most people are barely thinking about you at all. They're thinking about themselves. Here's the neuroscience. Your brain overestimates how much other people are paying attention to you. This made sense when you lived in a tribe of 150 people. If everyone was watching, reputation mattered for survival. So your brain learned to assume you're being watched. But you're not in a tribe anymore. You're in a city of millions, and no one's watching. Yet you're still performing, still moderating your behavior, still playing small to avoid judgment from an audience that isn't even paying attention. Think about this. How much of your life are you not living because of the assumption that people are judging? How much are you holding back? How many conversations aren't you having? How many clothes aren't you wearing? How many dreams aren't you chasing? Because of an illusion. Here's what's insidious. The spotlight effect creates a kind of self-protective paralysis. You think you're being careful and wise, but you're actually just imprisoned by an invisible audience. The paradox is this: the people who seem most confident, who take up space, who speak, who act, are not necessarily the most talented. They're just the ones who have realized that the audience isn't actually watching, and that realization freed them. But for the rest of us, we're living half-lives, edited for an invisible judge. Tonight, notice, what did you not do today because you were afraid of judgment? What space did you not take up? What opinion did you not voice? And ask yourself, who was actually watching? Law 6, the sunk cost fallacy. Why you stay in situations you hate. You're at a restaurant, you ordered something you don't like. You're halfway through it, it's bad, but you keep eating. Why? Because you paid for it. Your brain doesn't want to waste the money you already spent. So even though eating bad food makes you feel worse than leaving it, you force it down. Because of money you've already lost. This is the sunk cost fallacy, and it's destroying your life. You stay in a job you hate because you've already invested 5 years. You stay in a relationship that doesn't work because you've invested a decade. You keep pursuing a dream that's broken you because you've already sacrificed so much. You remain in a city you don't like because you've already moved there. Your brain is calculating. If I leave now, all that past investment is wasted, so I should stay to make it count. But here's the brutal truth. That investment is already gone. You can't get it back. The only question is, do you want to waste more? The moment you realize this, the moment you truly accept that the past is gone regardless of what you do now, something shifts. You're no longer trapped by what you've already spent. You can make decisions based on what's best going forward. But most people never make this shift. So they waste more years, more energy, more life, trying to validate past mistakes. Here's what's insidious. You'll call this commitment or loyalty or not giving up. You'll convince yourself that staying is noble, but what it really is, slow surrender to the past. The paradox is this: the people who move forward most quickly are not the most talented. They're the ones who can let go of past investments fastest. They can say, that was a mistake. I'm going somewhere else. And they sleep better because their present is no longer hostage to their past. As you drift off tonight, ask yourself, where am I staying because of something I've already invested? What would I choose if none of that investment existed? And can I give myself permission to change direction? Law 7, the illusion of understanding. You don't know anything about anyone. You think you understand your partner. You've been together for years. You know how they think. You know what they're going to do. Except you don't. This is the illusion of explanatory depth. Your brain creates a detailed model of how someone thinks and why they do what they do. You feel like you understand them, but when you actually dig deeper, you realize your model is surface-level nonsense. Here's the experiment. People were asked to explain how a toilet works. Most people said they could do it easily. They had a mental model, but when asked to actually explain it in detail, describing how the water gets from the tank to the bowl, how the flush mechanism works, they realized they didn't understand it at all. This is what happens with people. You think you understand why your partner acts the way they do. But if you actually had to explain the complete psychological history, neurological wiring, and daily stressors that led to their behavior right now, you'd realize you have no idea. You just have a story, a simplified narrative, and you mistake that narrative for understanding. Here's what's dangerous about this. Because you feel like you understand them, you stop asking questions. You stop being curious. You assume you know what they're thinking, what they need, what they're struggling with. And they feel unseen. Because you're not actually seeing them, you're seeing your model of them. The insidious part is that this feels like intimacy. You're not fighting. You're not confused. You have explanations for everything. So it feels like you're connected. But you're actually isolated, each in your own model of the other. The paradox is this: the couples who are most connected are not the ones with the most perfect understanding. They're the ones who remain radically curious, who ask questions constantly, who accept that they don't really know the other person, and who love them anyway. This creates real intimacy, not because they know each other better, but because they're both showing up with humility and genuine desire to understand. Tonight, pick someone you think you know well. Ask yourself, do I actually understand them? Or do I have a story about them that feels like understanding? Law 8, Status Quo Bias. The worst trap because you don't even see it. Right now, you're probably in a situation you don't actually want to be in. A job you tolerate. A relationship that's okay but not great. A living situation that's not ideal. A routine that doesn't light you up. And here's the crazy part. If someone offered you that exact situation right now, starting fresh, you probably wouldn't choose it. You'd say, "No, I want something better." But because you already have it, you keep it. Not because it's good, but because changing it is uncertain. Here's the mechanism. Your brain loves certainty. Even painful certainty is easier than uncertain possibility. A job you hate is certain. You know the pain, you know how to navigate it. You know the commute, the coworkers, the politics. Change means unknown pain. Maybe the new job is worse. Maybe you'll fail at it. Maybe this is as good as it gets and you're throwing away security for nothing. So you stay. And here's what's insidious. You're not consciously choosing to stay, you're just not choosing to leave. Inaction feels like neutrality, but it's not. It's a choice. It's the choice to let fear make your decisions for you. The neuroscience is interesting. When your brain faces a difficult choice, should I stay or should I go, it defaults to the status quo. It takes active effort to reject the status quo. And your brain conserves energy, so it defaults to stay the same. Which means the only way to change is to consciously override that default. You have to spend mental energy rejecting what's familiar. And most people don't have that energy because they're exhausted from tolerating their current situation. It's a trap. You're too tired to leave because you're tired from staying. But here's what I want you to notice. The discomfort of staying in the wrong situation is often camouflaged as peace. You think you're being calm or accepting, but you're actually being numb. Your nervous system isn't at peace. It's just given up. It's conserving energy by not fighting anymore. Real peace doesn't come from lack of change. It comes from making conscious choices, even if those choices are scary. Because the moment you decide, really decide, not just think about deciding, your nervous system shifts. Even before anything external changes, something internal changes, because you're no longer defaulting. You're choosing. The paradox is this: people who sleep best aren't the ones in perfect situations. They're the ones who have consciously chosen their situations. Even if those situations are difficult, even if they require sacrifice, the fact that they're chosen creates alignment. But people trapped in status quo, they're at war with themselves. Half their mind is screaming to leave. The other half is too scared to move. That internal conflict is what keeps them awake. Tonight, ask yourself, where am I defaulting instead of choosing? What would I choose if I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty? What am I tolerating that I don't actually want? Law 9, the illusion of control. You think you're steering, but you're just a passenger. You believe you control your life. You make decisions, you steer your ship, you're the captain. But here's the problem. Most of your decisions are made before you're conscious of them. Neuroscientists have shown that your brain makes a decision about 300 milliseconds before you're consciously aware of it. You think you decided to reach for your phone, but your brain decided that before you knew what was happening. You're just catching up. Here's what's fascinating and terrifying. You're not the decision maker. You're the rationalization maker. Your brain makes a choice based on unconscious patterns, and then your conscious mind creates a story about why that was a good decision. You reach for junk food. Your conscious mind says, I deserve a treat. I've worked hard. But really, your nervous system just needed a dopamine hit, and your conscious mind is spinning a narrative. You avoid having a difficult conversation. Your conscious mind says, the timing isn't right. I need to think about it more. But really, your nervous system is terrified and your conscious mind is creating an excuse. You stay in a bad relationship. Your conscious mind says, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I need to be more patient. But really, your nervous system is afraid of abandonment and your conscious mind is rationalization making. Here's what's insidious. You feel like you're in control because you can explain your decisions. You have reasons. You have logic. You have narratives. But those narratives are post hoc justifications for decisions your unconscious already made. The illusion of control feels good. It feels like you're steering. But you're not. You're a passenger confabulating explanations for where the car is actually going. Here's the paradox. The people who have the most control over their lives are not the ones who feel like they're in control. They're the ones who have accepted that they're not in control and have instead built systems to guide their unconscious decisions. They don't rely on willpower or decision-making. They've restructured their environment so that the right choices are the easy choices. They don't eat junk food because they don't keep it in the house. They have difficult conversations because they've scheduled them and committed publicly. They leave bad situations because they've removed the comfortable options. But most people are still trying to steer consciously, while actually being driven by unconscious patterns. As you fall asleep, ask yourself, what decisions did I make today that I think I consciously chose? Can I trace them back to an unconscious pattern? What are my hands reaching for when my mind isn't watching? Law 10, the Backfire Effect. The more you prove someone wrong, the more entrenched they become. You have facts, clear, documented evidence. Someone believes something false. You show them the facts. You think they'll change their mind. Instead, they dig in deeper. They become more convinced they're right. Your evidence didn't persuade them. It backfired. This is the backfire effect, and it's one of the most frustrating aspects of human behavior. Here's what happens. When you challenge someone's core belief with contradictory evidence, their brain doesn't process the evidence rationally. Instead, it perceives a threat. Their identity is being attacked. So their nervous system goes into defense mode. It hunts for ways to dismiss, discredit, or reinterpret the evidence. It looks for allies who share the belief. It digs deeper into communities that validate the belief. The belief becomes more entrenched, not less. Think about this in your life. Someone you care about believes something you think is false. You're trying to help them by showing them the truth, But every time you show them evidence, they become more defensive. They start attacking you. They start finding counter-evidence. They become more certain. You think you're being logical, but you're actually triggering a nervous system response that has nothing to do with logic. Here's the insidious part. You're probably doing this right now. You're so convinced you're right about something that any evidence against it feels like a personal attack, and you're fighting back. You're entrenching. You're becoming more extreme in your position. We all are. Every single person listening is doing this about something. Defending beliefs not because they're true, but because they're part of how we understand ourselves. The paradox is this: the most powerful way to change someone's mind is not to prove them wrong. It's to make them feel safe, to ask questions instead of providing answers, to validate their underlying concern while gently offering a different frame. But that requires empathy, and empathy requires letting go of the need to be right. Tonight, notice, what belief are you most defensive about? What topic makes you immediately combative? What evidence could you not accept, no matter how valid? And ask yourself, is this belief actually true, or am I defending an identity? Law 11, the planning fallacy. Your brain lies about how long things take. You think you can finish that project in a weekend. You think you can learn that skill in a month. You think you can write that book while working full-time. But you can't, you never can, and you never will. Here's what happens. Your brain plans based on the best-case scenario. No unexpected complications. No fatigue. No distractions. Just pure, focused effort exactly as planned. This is delusional, because complications always happen. Fatigue always sets in. Distractions always appear. So you end up overwhelmed, frustrated, behind schedule, and you feel like you failed. But you didn't fail. Your prediction-making system failed. Your brain systematically underestimates how long things take. This is called the planning fallacy. It's universal. Even when you know about it, even when you've experienced it hundreds of times, you still do it. Your brain insists, this time will be different. This time I'll focus. This time I won't get distracted. This time you'll fail, because you always fail at planning, because your brain is bad at predicting reality. Here's what's insidious. You're constantly living in a state of behindness. Behind on projects, behind on goals, behind on your own timeline, and this creates chronic stress. Your nervous system is always in catch-up mode. Your nervous system never relaxes because you're always trying to make up time you lost by planning badly. You're exhausted not because you're doing too much. You're exhausted because you're constantly racing against timelines that were never realistic. The paradox is this: the people who are most relaxed are not the ones who have the most time or the most efficient systems. They're the ones who have accepted the planning fallacy and planned accordingly. They add a buffer. They underpromise and overdeliver. They schedule less than they think they can do. They build rest into their plans. This feels inefficient. It feels like you're not maximizing. But what you're actually doing is living in alignment with reality instead of in conflict with an imagined timeline. Tonight, look at your schedule. Look at your goals. Look at what you promised to accomplish. Now ask yourself, did I plan for reality, or did I plan for the best-case scenario that will never happen? Law 12, the availability bias. Why you're afraid of the wrong things. A plane crashes. It's on every news outlet for 3 days. The footage plays over and over. People are panicking. Social media is full of it. Suddenly, people are terrified to fly. But here's the statistical reality. You're more likely to die driving to the airport than in the plane itself. By a lot. The risk didn't change. Only your perception did. This is the availability bias. Things you've recently heard about feel more likely and more dangerous. Your brain uses a mental shortcut. If I can easily remember examples of something, it must be common. If I saw news about shark attacks, sharks must be dangerous. If I know someone who got cancer, cancer must be everywhere. If I'm worried about something, that worry must be valid. But your brain is wrong. Your brain is confusing accessible to memory with statistically likely. Here's what's dangerous about this. Your fear becomes completely disproportionate to actual risk. You check your phone obsessively because you saw news about data breaches. You become anxious about rare diseases because you watched a documentary. You pull your kids out of activities because of one viral video of an incident. And what's really insidious? The media knows this. They weaponize availability bias. A plane crash is broadcast constantly. A car accident that kills more people than the plane crash gets 30 seconds at the end of the news, so planes feel more dangerous. A shooting happens. It's on every channel, so it feels like shootings are happening everywhere. But statistically, you're unlikely to ever encounter one. School shootings are tragic. They deserve attention. But availability bias makes parents terrified to send kids to school, when statistically, school is safer than it's ever been. So you're afraid of flying, terrified of sharks, anxious about diseases, while the actual biggest threats, sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, chronic stress, lack of sleep, don't feel scary because you don't see them on the news. And chronic stress, guess what it does? It destroys sleep. It ages you. It keeps you in a state of fear even when you're objectively safe. So availability bias doesn't just distort your perception of reality. It creates anxiety that literally harms your health. Here's the paradox. The people who sleep best aren't the ones with the least risks. They're the ones whose risk perception aligns with actual statistical risk. They know the real dangers. They protect against them. But they don't lose sleep over manufactured fears. They don't live in anxiety about things that are statistically unlikely. Tonight, before you panic about something, ask yourself, is this fear based on actual statistics or on what I've recently heard? Most of the time, it's the latter, and that fear is just noise. Let it pass. Your actual risks are much smaller than your availability bias suggests. Law 13, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. The least competent people are the most confident. Here's a paradox. The people who know the least are often the most confident. A beginner guitar player thinks they're pretty good after 2 months of practice. An incompetent leader is convinced they're brilliant. Someone who just read one book on psychology thinks they understand the human mind. Meanwhile, the expert is full of doubt. They know how much they don't know. They see all the complexity. They're aware of the gaps in their knowledge. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. People with low competence lack the metacognitive ability to recognize their incompetence, so they think they're competent. Here's how it works. To know that you're bad at something, you have to understand the skill deeply enough to recognize your own failures. But if you're bad at the skill, you haven't learned it deeply enough to do that. So you don't know you're bad, you think you're fine. The expert, on the other hand, has learned the skill so deeply that they understand all the ways they could be better. They see the complexity. They doubt themselves. This creates a weird inversion where confidence is inversely correlated with competence. The least competent are most confident. The most competent are most doubtful. Here's what's insidious. Confidence is attractive. Confident people attract followers. Confident people get hired. Confident people rise to positions of power. But they're often the least qualified to be there. This is why incompetent leaders are so common. They're confident. They made it to the top because of that confidence. But once there, they're making decisions in areas where they're unknowingly incompetent. They're convinced they're right. They're surrounded by people who seem to believe in them, so they never get the feedback that would make them doubt themselves. Think about your own life. What are you confident about that you're actually incompetent at? Where are you operating with the Dunning-Kruger effect in full force? The paradox is this. The people who grow the most are not the confident ones. They're the ones who can hold both things at once, competence in some areas and radical humility about how much they don't know. They're confident about specific skills, but they're humble about everything else. They're willing to be wrong. They're willing to learn. Tonight, ask yourself, where am I most confident? And have I actually verified that confidence? Or am I just incompetent enough not to know I'm incompetent? Law 14, the spotlight effect. You're more forgettable than you think. You walk into a room and trip slightly. Your heart stops. Everyone saw that. They're all judging you. This is mortifying. Except no one noticed. And if they did, they forgot about it 30 seconds later because they're too focused on their own anxieties. This is the spotlight effect. Your brain makes you feel like you're on stage, like people are watching you constantly, judging, evaluating. When in reality, most people are barely thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. Here's the neuroscience. Your brain overestimates how much other people pay attention to you. In evolutionary history, this made sense. You lived in a tribe of 150 people. If everyone was watching, reputation mattered for survival. So your brain learned to assume you're being watched. But you're not in a tribe of 150 anymore. You're in a city of millions, maybe billions if you count the internet, and no one's watching. Everyone's too busy worrying about whether they made a fool of themselves. Yet you're still performing, still moderating your behavior, still playing small to avoid judgment from an audience that isn't even paying attention. Here's a thought experiment. Think of all the embarrassing things you saw someone else do in the past month. Can you remember them? Probably not. You forgot them within minutes. Everyone else is forgetting your embarrassing moments just as quickly. But you're not. You're replaying them over and over. You're assuming everyone else is doing the same thing, but they're not. They're too busy with their own highlights and humiliations. Here's what's insidious. The spotlight effect creates a kind of self-protective paralysis. You think you're being careful and wise, but you're actually just imprisoned by an invisible audience. How much of your life are you not living because of the assumption that people are judging? How much are you holding back? How many conversations aren't you having? How many clothes aren't you wearing? How many dreams aren't you chasing? Because of an illusion, an invisible audience that isn't actually watching. The paradox is this: the people who seem most confident, who take up space, who speak, who act boldly, are not necessarily the most talented. They're just the ones who have realized that the audience isn't actually watching, and that realization freed them. They walk into a room and trip, and they laugh at themselves, because they know no one's replaying it in their head tonight. No one cares. Everyone's too focused on their own shame spirals. But for the rest of us, we're living half-lives, edited for an invisible judge. Tonight, notice, what did you not do today because you were afraid of judgment? What space did you not take up? What opinion did you not voice? And ask yourself honestly, who was actually watching? How many people will remember what you did today? Law 15, the recency bias. Your mood is determined by what happened last. You're having a great day, then your partner says something dismissive. Suddenly, your entire day is ruined. You were fine, now you're upset, not because of the 8 good hours, but because of the 5-minute interaction at the end. This is the recency bias. Your brain weighs recent events much more heavily than distant ones when evaluating your overall experience. So your mood isn't actually determined by the balance of your day. It's determined by the last thing that happened. This is why people have amazing vacations, but remember them as disappointing because of one bad meal on the last day. This is why you can have a productive week, but feel like a failure because you procrastinated on Friday. Here's what's insidious. You're not actually responding to your life. You're responding to your most recent memory, and your memory is constantly being overwritten. Your brain doesn't store a comprehensive file of your day and then calculate an average mood. It stores your last impression. and that becomes your story about the entire day. So if you end your day on a negative note, you'll go to sleep believing today was bad, even if it wasn't, even if most of it was fine. This is why people struggle with insomnia. They replay the one interaction that went wrong. They ruminate on the one mistake they made. The entire day is erased from their memory and replaced with this one negative moment. The paradox is this: the people who sleep best often do something simple. They consciously create a positive last moment. They end their day with gratitude. They write down 3 things that went well. They call someone they love. They read something beautiful. They do something intentionally positive right before bed. Not because it changes what happened during the day, but because it overwrites the final memory. It becomes a recency bias in their favor. So tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, what's my last memory going to be? Am I letting a negative moment define my entire day? Or can I consciously create a positive final impression that will be what I actually remember? Law 16, Mere Exposure Effect. You like things because you've seen them. You hear a song you hate for the first time. It's annoying. The melody is irritating. You change the station. But you hear it again and again and again. By the 10th time, it's starting to grow on you. By the 20th time, you kind of like it. You didn't think the song got better. You didn't re-examine your values. You just heard it more times, and your brain interpreted familiarity as goodness. This is the mere exposure effect. You tend to like things simply because you're familiar with them. Novelty and uncertainty trigger your nervous system. Familiarity feels safe. So your brain starts to like familiar things. This is why people stay in bad relationships, not because they're actually happy, but because they've been together so long that the other person is familiar. Familiar feels safe. Unfamiliar feels dangerous, so they stay. This is why people stick with bad music, bad shows, bad habits, because repetition creates the illusion of affection. Here's what's insidious. You think you like things because they're good, but often you like them because they're familiar. And the more familiar they become, the more you convince yourself they're good. This is how mediocrity reproduces. You accept something, you live with it, familiarity sets in, you start to like it. Your friends ask, "Why do you like that?" And you have to invent reasons because you can't admit the real reason, because you've seen it 1,000 times. The paradox is this: growth requires discomfort. Growth requires choosing unfamiliar options even when they feel uncertain. Because the moment you get comfortable, the mere exposure effect kicks in, and you start liking the comfortable thing more and more. This is why people stop growing. Not because they lack ambition, but because familiarity is so powerfully rewarding to the nervous system that it keeps them locked in place. Tonight, ask yourself, what am I tolerating because it's familiar? What habits have I accepted because I've done them 1,000 times? What mediocre situation am I starting to like because I've been in it long enough? Law 17, the illusion of transparency. You're worse at reading people than you think. You think you can tell when someone is lying. You watch their eyes, their nervous tics, the way they touch their face. Except you can't. You're almost always wrong. People aren't transparent, and you're not nearly as good at reading them as you think you are. Here's the illusion of transparency. You believe that if you can see someone's behavior, you can deduce their internal state. But behavior is not transparent to internal state. You can't see into someone's mind by watching their body. A person might avoid eye contact because they're lying, or because they're shy, or because they have anxiety, or because they're sad, or because they're processing what you said, or because they're thinking deeply. But you see the averted eyes and you create a narrative. They're lying. They're hiding something. You're making a guess based on incomplete information, and you're experiencing that guess as a fact. Here's what's insidious. Because you feel confident in your reading, you start to trust it. You start to make decisions based on it. You withdraw from someone because you're reading that they don't like you, but they're actually just stressed about work. You confront someone about lying, but they were just anxious. Now they feel attacked. Now they actually become defensive. And now your false reading becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You destroy relationships based on narratives you created about behavior you misinterpreted. The paradox is this: the people who have the best relationships are not the ones who are best at reading other people. They're the ones who have accepted that they can't read people, so they ask. Instead of assuming, they ask, "I noticed you seemed quiet. Is something wrong?" Instead of concluding, they inquire, "I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Can you tell me what you're feeling?" This requires vulnerability. It requires admitting that you don't actually know what's going on inside someone else, but it's the only path to actual intimacy. Tonight, think about someone whose behavior you're reading. Are you actually reading them? Or are you creating a narrative and mistaking it for insight? Law 18, the Endowment Effect. You overvalue things you own. You buy a mug. It's not special. You could get an identical one at the store for $5. But now you own it. It sits on your desk. You use it every day. It becomes your mug. Someone offers you $20 for it. You laugh. $20, that's not nearly enough. But why? A moment ago, you would have walked past an identical mug without a second thought. Now that you own it, it's suddenly valuable. This is the endowment effect. You overvalue things you own simply because you own them. Here's how it works. Ownership creates a sense of identity. The mug becomes part of you. It's not just a mug anymore. It's your mug. Giving it up feels like losing a part of yourself. This is why people can't let go of things. Not because the things are valuable, but because ownership has made them feel valuable. This is why you have a closet full of clothes you never wear but can't throw away. This is why you keep books you never read. This is why you hold onto relationships that don't serve you. You own them, so you overvalue them, and letting go feels like a loss. Here's what's insidious. The endowment effect keeps you stuck. You stay in situations, keep possessions, maintain relationships, not because they're good, but because you've attached your identity to them. Your career becomes your identity. Changing careers feels like losing yourself. Your long-term relationship becomes your identity. Leaving feels impossible. Your house becomes your identity. Moving feels like abandonment. But these are all just things you possess, and possession is a trap. The paradox is this: the people who are most free are the ones who can let go of everything, possessions, relationships, identities, beliefs, because they've understood that they're not actually attached to anything. They own things, but they're not owned by them. This creates a lightness, a freedom, because they can make decisions based on what's actually good, not on what they've become attached to. Tonight, look around your space. What are you not willing to let go of? And ask yourself, is this valuable because it's actually good, or valuable because I own it? Can you feel the difference in your body? Law 19, the default effect. You'll never choose the hard path. A company redesigns their retirement plan. They want to encourage saving, so they make the default option automatic contribution. Suddenly, retirement savings skyrocket. People are saving way more money. Did people become more financially responsible? No, they just took the default option. When you had to actively choose to save, you didn't. But when saving was the default, when you had to actively choose not to save, you did. This is the default effect. Humans overwhelmingly choose whatever is presented as the default, even when they have the option to choose something else. Think about your life. What defaults have you accepted? The default religion of your childhood. You probably still have it, or you rebelled against it. Either way, it's shaped you. The default diet of your culture. You probably eat close to what everyone around you eats. The default career path. Get good grades, go to college, get a job. You probably followed something close to this without questioning it. You're living someone else's default, and you think you're choosing. Here's what's insidious. The default is built by someone else with someone else's interests in mind. Your culture wants you to consume, so the default is consumption. Your education system wants you to be compliant, so the default is obedience. Your family wants you to be like them, so the default is conformity. And you're just defaulting. You're taking the path of least resistance. You're following the script that was written for you before you were born. The paradox is this: most people never wake up. They default their entire lives. They reach 70 years old and realize they never actually chose anything. They just followed the defaults. But the people who do wake up, the ones who consciously examine each default, who ask, is this actually what I want? About every major life decision, they have to expend enormous energy, because it's hard to swim against the current of defaults. But that effort is the only thing that makes life actually yours. Tonight, ask yourself, what defaults am I accepting without question? What default path am I on? And would I choose it again if I were choosing from scratch right now? If the answer is no, what would it take to change course? Law 20. The curse of knowledge. You can't explain things to people who don't know yet. You learned something new. It's become obvious to you. You can't imagine why everyone doesn't understand it. So you try to explain it. You use jargon. You skip steps. You assume everyone already knows the basics. And people look confused. They say, I don't get it. You're frustrated. It seems so simple. What's hard to understand? This is the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you can no longer imagine what it's like not to know it. You can't remember your own confusion. You can't retrace your own learning process. The steps that were difficult for you to learn are now unconscious. You've automated them. So when you explain, you skip those steps because they happen automatically for you now. This is why people with expertise are often bad teachers. They know too much. They've forgotten what it was like to not know. Here's what's insidious. Because of the curse of knowledge, you assume other people are stupid when they don't understand you. But they're not stupid. You're just unable to access what it was like before you knew. This destroys relationships. Your partner doesn't understand why you're upset, but the reason is obvious to you. You've been thinking about it for days. You think they're insensitive, but they just don't have the context you have. Your kid doesn't understand something simple. You get frustrated, but they're in the state you were in before you learned it. They can't see what you see yet. The paradox is this: the best teachers are the ones who have recently learned, because they remember the confusion. They remember the steps. They remember what it was like not to know. But by the time you become an expert, you've lost the ability to teach. Tonight, think about something you find frustrating that someone doesn't understand. Can you remember what it was like before you understood it? Can you access that confusion and walk someone through it step by step? Law 21. The focusing illusion. What you think about most becomes your reality. Before you bought your car, you rarely noticed other cars like it on the road. After you bought it, you see your car everywhere, dozens of them. How did you not notice before? They were always there, but your brain wasn't focused on them, so they were invisible. This is the focusing illusion. Things you focus on seem more common, more important, more real than things you don't focus on. Here's how this works. Your brain receives billions of data points. It can't process all of them, so it filters. It pays attention to what you're focused on. Everything else is invisible. So if you're focused on threats, threats are everywhere. If you're focused on lack, scarcity is everywhere. If you're focused on opportunities, opportunities are everywhere. You're not actually seeing the world accurately. You're seeing the world you're focused on, and that world becomes real to you. Here's what's insidious. Anxiety uses this mechanism perfectly. You focus on a possible threat. Your brain highlights all the evidence that the threat is real. It filters out the evidence that you're safe, so the threat feels real, because in your perception it is. Depression uses it too. You focus on failure. Your brain shows you all your failures. It filters out your successes, so you believe you're a failure, because that's what your focus perception shows you. The paradox is this: you can't change what actually is, but you can change what you focus on, and changing your focus changes your reality. Not because the world changes, but because your perception of the world changes, and perception is reality for your nervous system. If you focus on what's working, you'll see a different world than if you focus on what's broken. Both are true, both are real, but you'll only see one. Tonight, what are you focused on? What would you see if you shifted your focus? And can you intentionally focus on something that calms your nervous system instead of something that triggers it? Law 22, Loss Aversion. You hate losing more than you enjoy winning. You're offered a bet. If a coin lands on heads, you win $100. If it lands on tails, you lose $50. Statistically, this is a good bet. You should take it, but most people don't. Why? Because the pain of losing $50 feels greater than the pleasure of winning $100. This is loss aversion. Your brain is more sensitive to losses than to equivalent gains. In evolutionary terms, this makes sense. Losing resources meant death. Gaining resources meant survival. So your nervous system learned to be extremely attentive to losses. But in the modern world, this is paralyzing. You don't take the job with higher pay but more risk. You don't leave the relationship that isn't working. You don't try the new thing, because the potential loss feels bigger than the potential gain. Here's what's insidious. Loss aversion keeps you small, it keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stuck. All growth requires risking something. You have to risk being wrong to learn something new. You have to risk rejection to find connection. You have to risk failure to achieve anything meaningful. But loss aversion makes every risk feel catastrophic, so you don't take them. You stay in your safe, small life. The paradox is this: the people who accomplish the most are not the ones least afraid of loss. They're the ones who have decided that staying the people who accomplish the most are not the ones least afraid of loss. They're the ones who have decided that staying the same is a bigger LSS than taking the risk. Tonight, what are you not doing because of loss aversion? What opportunity are you avoiding? What risk won't you take? And if you stayed exactly as you are now for the next 10 years, would that feel like a loss? Law 23, Hyperbolic Discounting. You value now over later, even when later matters more. You know exercise is important. You know you should do it. But right now, you're tired. Right now, the couch is more comfortable. Right now, rest feels better than the abstract future benefit of fitness. So you don't exercise. Your future self will pay the price, but your present self gets the reward, and your brain heavily weights the present. This is hyperbolic discounting. You discount the future so heavily that it barely registers. Future pain or future reward feels like nothing compared to present pleasure or present relief. Think about all the ways this plays out. You know you should sleep, but you scroll your phone instead. You know you should eat healthy, but the processed food tastes good now. You know you should save money, but spending it now feels better. You know you should study, but procrastinating feels better right now. Your entire life is built around present rewards at the expense of future consequences. Here's what's insidious. Your future self is not hypothetical. Your future self is real, and your present self is making decisions that your future self will have to live with. The person you'll be in 5 years is being shaped by the choices you're making right now. But because that future person feels abstract, you don't factor them into your decisions. So you destroy your health, your finances, your relationships, your potential, not through one big decision, but through 1,000 tiny decisions where you valued the present moment over your actual future. The paradox is this: The people who have the most fulfilled futures are not the ones who denied themselves present pleasure. They are the ones who learned to connect present and future. They made the future feel real. They visualized themselves in 5 years. They imagine the regret of staying the same. They make future consequences emotionally real so that they weigh them equally with present rewards. Tonight, what is your present self doing that your future self will regret? Can you make that future consequence feel real right now? And can you choose one small thing differently tomorrow because your future self actually matters? Law 24, the clustering illusion. Your brain sees patterns that aren't there. You flip a coin 10 times. You get heads, heads, tails, heads, tails, tails, heads, heads, tails, heads. You look at that sequence, you see patterns. There are 2 heads in a row, then a tail, that's a pattern. But there's no pattern. It's random. Your brain is just seeing patterns in randomness. This is the clustering illusion. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and when it sees data, it finds patterns, even when there are no patterns. Here's how this destroys your life. You have 2 good days in a row. Your brain decides this is the start of a positive trend. You're about to have a breakthrough. Your mood lifts. Then day 3 is bad. Your brain is confused. What happened to the pattern? You have 2 bad interactions with someone. Your brain decides this is a pattern. This person is bad. They don't like you. They're unreliable. And now every interaction with them is filtered through that belief. You make 2 mistakes at work. Your brain decides you're incompetent. You're going to get fired. The whole narrative is built from a 2-point cluster that means nothing. But once your brain has decided on the pattern, it selectively sees evidence that confirms it. You stop seeing the days that are okay. You only see the bad ones. You stop seeing the good interactions. You only see the bad ones. You stop seeing your successes. You only see the failures. Here's what's insidious. The clustering illusion makes you very confident about things that are actually just noise. You feel certain. You have data. You have a pattern, so you act on it. You break up with someone based on a 2-event cluster that meant nothing. You quit a job based on 2 bad weeks. You change your entire life direction based on a random sequence your brain interpreted as meaningful. The paradox is this: real patterns only become visible with a lot of data and a lot of time. But your brain creates confident certainty about patterns after just 2 or 3 events. The people who navigate life best are the ones who have learned to distrust their clustering illusions. They don't make major decisions based on short-term patterns. They don't change their entire self-concept based on a bad week. They observe longer sequences before deciding something is actually a pattern. Tonight, what patterns are you seeing that might just be clustering illusions? What 2-event pattern are you basing your behavior on? Can you wait for more data before you decide? Law 25, the contrast effect. How you feel depends on what you compare to. You've been living in a small apartment. You're fine with it. It's functional. Then you visit a friend's huge house. Suddenly your apartment feels tiny. It feels depressing. You feel poor. Nothing about your apartment changed, but how you feel about it changed, because you now have a different point of comparison. This is the contrast effect. Your feelings are not based on absolute conditions. They're based on relative conditions. They're based on what you compare yourself to. This is why rich people are not happier than middle-class people if the rich people are surrounded by people richer than them. The absolute wealth is higher, but the relative comparison is the same, so the feeling is the same. This is why social media is destroying your mental health. You're comparing your actual life, with all its unglamorous reality, to everyone's highlight reel. You're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes footage to everyone else's best of compilation. And of course you feel inadequate. You're playing the wrong comparison game. Here's what's insidious. You can't actually control your circumstances much, but you can control your comparisons. Yet most people never do. They just passively accept whatever comparison their environment serves them. You see what your neighbor bought. Now you feel poor. You see what your friend accomplished. Now you feel like a failure. You see what your ex is doing. Now you feel like you made the wrong choice. All of these are contrast effects. None of them reflect your actual reality, but they shape how you feel about your actual reality. The paradox is this: the people who are happiest are often not the ones with the best circumstances. They're the ones who have learned to control their comparisons. They avoid social media or use it differently. They spend time with people who are on a similar path. They remind themselves of what they had before to appreciate what they have now. They measure themselves against who they were yesterday, not against who someone else is today. Tonight, what comparisons are you making that are making you feel bad? Can you change the comparison? Can you compare yourself to who you were a year ago instead of to the person who seems to have it all? Law 26, the Bystander Effect. You're less likely to help when others are around. Someone collapses on the subway, everyone sees it, everyone knows something is wrong. But no one helps. Everyone assumes someone else will call 911. Everyone assumes someone else will intervene. So no one does, and the person doesn't get help. This is the bystander effect. You're less likely to take action when other people are present, because responsibility gets diffused. You assume someone else is responsible. But here's the thing: everyone is assuming the same thing, so no one's responsible and nothing happens. This is terrifying, but it's also incredibly common, not just in emergencies, in everything. You see something wrong at work. You assume a manager will address it. You see a friend in trouble. You assume another friend will help. You see injustice. You assume someone else will stand up. But everyone's assuming the same thing. Here's what's insidious: the bystander effect is not about being a bad person. Good people participate in it all the time. It's about the way group psychology works. Responsibility diffuses. Initiative evaporates. This is how toxic cultures persist. Everyone knows it's toxic, but everyone assumes someone else will change it, so it never changes. This is how abuse continues. Everyone knows it's happening, but everyone assumes someone else will report it, so it continues. This is how injustice persists. Everyone knows it's wrong, but everyone assumes someone else will act, so it persists. The paradox is this: the people who create change are not the ones who notice problems. Everyone notices problems. The ones who create change are the ones who assume they're responsible for fixing it. They don't wait for someone else. They don't assume someone else cares more. They assume that if they don't act, nothing will change, and they act from that assumption. Tonight, ask yourself, where am I assuming someone else is responsible? What problem am I not acting on because I assume someone else will handle it? And if everyone's thinking that way, what's actually going to change? Law 27, the curse of options. More choices make you miserable, not happy. A store has 6 types of jam. People try them, people buy. Another store has 24 types of jam. People try them, but people don't buy. They're overwhelmed, too many options, can't decide. More choices sounds like freedom, but it's actually paralysis. Here's how it works. Each option has a cost. You have to evaluate it. You have to imagine what you'd miss if you chose something else. You have to imagine the regret if you chose wrong. With 6 options, the cost is manageable. With 24 options, the cost is paralyzing. You can imagine missing out on 18 other possibilities. This is why people with infinite options in love are single. Why people with infinite career options feel stuck. Why people with infinite entertainment options watch nothing and scroll for hours. More options don't create freedom. They create decision paralysis and chronic regret. Here's what's insidious. You'll think you want more options. More choices sound good. But once you have them, you'll feel worse. You'll wonder if you made the right choice. You'll imagine the path you didn't take. you'll feel trapped by the fact that every choice meant giving up something else. The paradox is this: the people who are happiest are often the ones with fewer choices. They chose one person to love and stopped looking. They chose one career and stopped wondering. They chose a life and committed to it. This creates a kind of peace that people with infinite options never experience, because they've eliminated the paralysis of comparison. Tonight, where are you drowning in options? Where is your infinite choice actually paralyzing you? And what would happen if you just chose one thing and committed to it fully? Law 28, Confirmation Bias. You see what you expect to see. You decide someone is arrogant. Now you notice every time they talk about themselves. You don't notice all the times they ask about others. You notice the one self-focused comment and forget the 3 other comments. Your brain is selecting evidence to confirm your prior belief. This is confirmation bias. You don't see the world objectively. You see the world you expect to see. Your brain filters information to match what you already believe. A scientist believes a hypothesis. They're not consciously manipulating data, but they notice results that support the hypothesis more clearly than results that contradict it. They're not lying. They're just seeing what they expect to see. You believe you're bad at something. You focus on every mistake. You ignore every success, because your brain is looking for evidence that confirms, I'm bad at this. Here's what's insidious. Confirmation bias feels like objectivity. You're just noticing things. You're just seeing what's true, but you're not. You're creating a narrative and then finding evidence to support it. This is how prejudices are born and maintained. You believe something about a group. You notice evidence that confirms it. You ignore evidence that contradicts it. Your belief strengthens. You become more certain. You see more confirming evidence. But you're not actually observing reality. You're observing a filtered version of reality that matches your expectations. The paradox is this: the only way to escape confirmation bias is to actively look for disconfirming evidence. You have to ask, what evidence would prove me wrong, and where is that evidence? But most people never do. Most people just look for confirmation. Tonight, what belief are you confirming? What are you selectively noticing to support it? What would you see if you deliberately looked for disconfirming evidence? Law 29. The hot-cold empathy gap. You can't predict how you'll feel when your emotional state changes. You're hungry. You think about what you'll eat. You predict you'll want something light and healthy. But then you eat and you're satisfied and you go out and you're bored. Now your emotional state is different. Now you want something adventurous and indulgent. You couldn't predict it because you were in a different emotional state when you predicted it. This is the hot-cold empathy gap. When you're in one emotional state, you can't accurately predict what you'll want or do when you're in a different emotional state. When you're calm, you think you'll handle conflict well. But when you're angry, your mind does things calm you didn't predict. When you're sober, you think you'll drink moderately. But when you're drunk, your mind makes different calculations. When you're alone, you think you won't need anyone. But when you're lonely, your mind is desperate. You can't bridge the gap between these emotional states, so you can't predict your own behavior. Here's what's insidious. This creates a kind of betrayal of yourself. You make promises to yourself in one state and break them in another. You plan something in calm and abandon it in stress. You commit to something when you're rational and sabotage it when you're emotional. And you feel weak. You feel like you can't follow through. But the real problem is that you're making decisions in one state and trying to execute them in another, and those states are incommensurable. The paradox is this: the people who follow through are not the ones with the most willpower. They're the ones who have accepted the hot-cold empathy gap. They don't rely on future willpower. They design their environment and their habits so that the right choice is the easy choice in every emotional state. They don't promise themselves they'll be strong. They make it impossible to be weak. Tonight, what promises have you made to yourself that you can't keep because of emotional state changes? Can you accept that and design differently instead? Law 30, the anchoring effect. The first number you hear becomes your reference point. A car costs $30,000. You think that's expensive, but the dealer says it usually costs $35,000. Now $30,000 seems like a deal. Nothing about the car changed. The actual value didn't change. But because you heard a different number first, your perception changed. This is the anchoring effect. Whatever number, idea, or value you encounter first becomes your reference point for everything that follows. Negotiators know this. They make the first offer, not because it's what they actually want, but because it anchors the negotiation around that number. Everything that follows is evaluated relative to that anchor. Your parents' income becomes your reference point for normal. The amount your first partner made becomes your reference point. The price of the first apartment you looked at becomes your reference point. These anchors shape your entire perception of value. Here's what's insidious. You think you're evaluating things objectively, but you're not. You're comparing them to an arbitrary anchor you encountered first. A job that pays $60,000 feels like good pay if the anchor is $50,000, but it feels like bad pay if the anchor is $80,000. The job didn't change. The anchor did. This is why sales tactics work so well. The salesperson establishes an anchor. Everything else is evaluated relative to that anchor. And you feel like you're making a rational decision when really you're just comparing to a reference point that was arbitrarily chosen. The paradox is this: the people least affected by anchoring are the ones who have learned to notice anchors. They recognize when they're being anchored. They deliberately choose their own reference points. They don't accept the first number they hear. They establish their own baseline. They compare to multiple options. They don't let one arbitrary anchor determine their entire perception. Tonight, what anchors are you operating under? What was the first number or idea you encountered that's now your reference point? Can you establish a different anchor and see how your perception shifts? Law 31, the narrative fallacy. You lose your job. 3 months later, you get a better job. Your brain connects these events. Getting fired was the best thing that happened to me. It forced me to find something better. But that's narrative. That's a story your brain made up to make sense of chaos. Maybe you would have found a better job anyway. Maybe losing your job was genuinely bad and you're just spinning it. The narrative gives you meaning. It lets you sleep at night knowing that suffering had a purpose. Here's what's insidious. Narratives are powerful. They shape how you interpret everything. They shape your identity. They shape what you're capable of. If your narrative is, "I'm lucky and things work out for me," you'll interpret random good events as confirmation. If your narrative is, "I'm unlucky and things never work out," you'll interpret random bad events as confirmation. But these narratives are not objective truth. They're stories you made up, and they determine your entire reality. The paradox is this: people don't need true narratives. They need coherent narratives. A narrative that explains their past, gives meaning to their suffering, and creates a direction for their future. The people who thrive are the ones who have chosen empowering narratives, not because these narratives are true, but because they're functional. They create agency instead of victimhood. They create hope instead of despair. But most people never realize they've chosen a narrative. They think they're just seeing what's real. Tonight, what narrative are you telling yourself about your life? Is it the only true narrative? Or is it just one possible story you're telling? What would a different narrative look like? Law 32, the IKEA Effect. You love things more if you build them yourself. You buy furniture from IKEA. You have to assemble it. It takes hours. It's frustrating. But now you love it. You treasure it. You defend it fiercely. Someone with a similar, store-assembled piece doesn't love theirs as much. but yours is special because you built it. This is the IKEA effect. You overvalue things you've contributed to building or creating. Here's how it works. Effort and struggle create emotional attachment. Your brain thinks, I spent energy on this, so it must be valuable. Otherwise, why would I have spent the energy? This is partly good. It creates commitment. You're more likely to maintain something you built. You're more likely to stick with something you struggled to achieve. But it's also destructive. You can fall in love with bad ideas because you've invested effort in them. You can defend flawed plans because you've put work into them. You can stay in bad situations because you've sacrificed to build them. Here's what's insidious. The IKEA effect is invisible. You'll think you love something because it's genuinely good, but really, you love it because you built it. If someone handed you the exact same thing pre-made, you wouldn't care about it. The paradox is this. The people who create the most meaningful things are not the ones who are most attached to their work. They're the ones who have learned to separate the value of the work from their emotional investment in it. They can look at something they built, recognize if it's flawed, and change it. They're not defending it because of the IKEA effect. They're evaluating it objectively. Tonight, what are you overvaluing because you built it? What effort have you invested that's making you defend something that might not be good? Can you separate your emotional attachment from your objective evaluation? Law 33, the mere thought effect. Thinking about something can change your mood. You're feeling fine, then you think about something stressful, a deadline, a conflict, a health concern. Suddenly, your mood has shifted. You weren't actually stressed, but thinking about something stressful made you stressed. This is the mere thought effect. Your brain doesn't distinguish between something actually happening and the mental simulation of something happening. When you vividly imagine a threat, your nervous system responds as if the threat is real. Your heart rate increases, your cortisol spikes, your muscles tense. The threat isn't real, but your nervous system doesn't know that. Here's what's insidious. You spend hours mentally simulating bad scenarios. You're not actually in danger, but your nervous system thinks you are, so it stays in stress mode. This is anxiety. It's not about something bad actually happening. It's about your mind simulating bad things happening and your nervous system responding as if they're real. You lie awake at night thinking about a conversation that might go badly. Your nervous system is experiencing it as if it's actually happening. You're not sleeping because a simulation is keeping you awake. The paradox is this. The people who sleep best are the ones who have learned to control their mental simulations. They don't prevent bad thoughts from occurring. They've learned to simulate less catastrophically. They imagine challenges and their response to them, not just the challenges. Or they've learned to notice the mental simulation and remind themselves, this isn't real, this is just a thought. That recognition, the awareness that it's a simulation, not reality, can calm your nervous system. Tonight, what simulations are you running in your mind? What bad scenarios are you imagining? Can you recognize them as mental simulations, not reality? Law 34, the Ostrich Effect. You ignore information that's emotionally threatening. You know you have debt. You know it's there, but you don't look at the statements. You don't calculate the total. You don't face it. You're burying your head in the sand like an ostrich, not because looking will change anything, but because not looking lets you avoid the emotional pain. This is the ostrich effect. You don't want to know things that will make you feel bad, so you don't look. A health concern emerges. You don't go to the doctor, not because you're stupid, but because confirmation would be painful. A relationship is deteriorating. You don't talk about it, not because talking won't help, but because acknowledgement would mean dealing with it. Here's what's insidious. Ignoring information doesn't protect you from the reality. It just prevents you from dealing with it. The debt doesn't go away. The health concern doesn't improve. The relationship doesn't heal. But psychologically, not knowing feels better than knowing, so you choose to not know. The paradox is this: the people who have the least anxiety are not the ones with the fewest problems. They're the ones who have faced their problems. They've looked at the statements. They've gone to the doctor. They've had the difficult conversations. Because once you've faced it, you can do something about it. And doing something about it, even if it's hard, creates a sense of agency. Agency is the opposite of anxiety. But avoidance creates a low-level anxiety that never resolves because you never address the thing causing it. Tonight, what information are you avoiding? What are you not looking at? And would knowing actually help, even if it's uncomfortable? Law 35, the representativeness heuristic. You judge based on resemblance, not probability. Someone is quiet, likes to read, and is thoughtful. You think, they must be a librarian. But statistically, they're probably not. There are way more quiet, book-loving people who aren't librarians than people who are. But they resemble your mental image of a librarian, so you guess librarian. This is the representativeness heuristic. You judge how likely something is based on how much it resembles a typical example, not based on actual probability. Here's how it destroys decisions. You meet someone who is charming and successful. They seem trustworthy. They resemble your mental image of a trustworthy person. So you trust them, you give them money, you believe them. But they're actually a con artist. And con artists are charming and successful because that's how they con people. You've made a judgment based on representativeness, not probability, and it cost you. Here's what's insidious. Representativeness feels intuitive. It feels like you're reading people well, like you have good instincts. But you're just noticing surface resemblance and mistaking it for insight. The paradox is this: good judges of people don't trust their intuitions. They slow down. They ask questions. They gather more data. They don't judge based on how much someone resembles their mental image. They judge based on actual patterns and behaviors. Tonight, who are you judging based on representativeness? Who do you think you know because they resemble your mental image of something? What data are you missing that would change your judgment? Law 36, the spotlight effect on others. You overestimate how much others notice you. You get a haircut. You think everyone will notice. Everyone will have an opinion. But no one notices, or if they do, they forget. Because everyone's too busy thinking about their own appearance to think about yours. This is the spotlight effect applied to others. You believe you're more noticed than you actually are. Which is funny, because you also don't notice most people most of the time. You're too focused on yourself. But you assume everyone is focused on you. Here's what's insidious. This creates unnecessary anxiety. You're afraid of judgment that's not even happening. You're modifying your behavior to impress people who aren't paying attention. You dress differently. You speak differently. You act differently, all for an audience that isn't actually watching. And the people who do matter, the few people who are actually paying close attention to you, they're not impressed by your performance. They're wondering why you're acting like a character instead of being yourself. The paradox is this: the people who seem the most confident are the ones who have realized the spotlight effect is an illusion. They know no one's watching. So they just be themselves. And ironically, that's more attractive than performing for an imaginary audience. Tonight, who are you performing for? And if you really believe that no one was watching, who would you be? Law 37, the false consensus effect. You think everyone thinks like you. You have a value. You think most people share it. You have a belief. You think most people believe it. You're usually wrong, but your brain assumes consensus. This is the false consensus effect. You overestimate how much your views are shared. You underestimate how different other people are. So you're constantly shocked when people don't agree with you. You're constantly surprised by what others believe or value. You think you're normal, and everyone else is weird, but everyone's thinking the same thing about you. Here's what's insidious. This effect makes you dismiss people who think differently. They're just wrong. They don't understand. They're not being rational. But maybe they're just different. Maybe their map of the world is just as valid as yours, just drawn differently. The paradox is this: the people who understand others best are the ones who have accepted that there is no consensus, that everyone's operating from a different set of values, experiences, and assumptions. They don't assume agreement, they ask, they listen, they try to understand the other person's map. This creates genuine connection instead of judgment. Tonight, who do you think is wrong just because they think differently than you? Can you imagine their worldview being just as valid as yours, just different? Law 38, the outcome bias. You judge decisions based on results, not quality. You make a risky decision. It works out. You feel like it was a good decision. You make a safe decision. It doesn't work out. You feel like it was a bad decision. But the quality of a decision isn't determined by the outcome. It's determined by the information you had at the time and the logic you used. A good decision can have a bad outcome. A bad decision can have a good outcome. Luck is involved. This is the outcome bias. You're judging decisions retroactively based on results, not based on the decision-making process. Here's how it's insidious. You're constantly learning the wrong lessons. If you made a bad decision that had good outcomes, you'll do it again, because the outcome was good. If you made a good decision that had bad outcomes, you'll avoid it, because the outcome was bad. You're training yourself to make worse decisions because you're judging them by results instead of by quality. The paradox is this: people who make good decisions long-term are not the ones who always win. They're the ones who have learned to evaluate their decisions by process, not outcome. They can make a good decision, accept a bad outcome, and not blame themselves. And they can make a bad decision, get lucky, and still acknowledge it was bad. This detachment from outcome creates long-term learning. Short-term learning creates long-term failure. Tonight, what decisions are you judging based on outcomes? Can you separate the quality of the decision from the quality of the result? Law 39, the planning fallacy extended. You'll fail to plan, then plan to fail. You plan a project. You estimate how long it will take. You're usually wrong, too optimistic. So you end up behind, you're stressed. You're working overtime, you're not sleeping. This keeps happening. You keep planning optimistically. You keep missing deadlines. But you don't change your planning process. You just get more stressed. Here's what's insidious. The planning fallacy doesn't just make you miss deadlines. It makes you sick. Your body is constantly in stress mode because you're constantly behind. You're not sleeping well because you're anxious about timelines you can't meet. And poor sleep makes everything worse. The paradox is this: changing your planning, adding buffers, planning less, accepting that you'll be slower than you think, feels like giving up. It feels like you're not ambitious enough. But actually, it's accepting reality. And accepting reality is the only way to escape the stress cycle. Tonight, look at your schedule. Are you planning optimistically? Are you going to be behind? What would it feel like to plan more conservatively and actually meet your deadlines? Law 40, the sunk cost trap revisited. You can't throw anything away. You buy something, you use it once, you never use it again. But you can't throw it away. You paid for it. That money is already gone, but your brain won't let it go. So your closet fills with things you don't use. Your life fills with obligations you don't want. Your time fills with projects you've abandoned. And your physical and mental space gets cluttered. The paradox is this: the people with the least regret are the ones who have learned to let go, not just of things, but of the mental energy spent defending why they kept them. You don't need that guilt. You don't need that clutter. You just need to let it go. Tonight, what are you keeping that you've already paid for? What are you not letting go of because of sunk costs? Can you give yourself permission to release it? Law 41, the fundamental attribution error. You blame people's character for their behavior. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You think they're a reckless driver, they're inconsiderate. But you don't know their situation. Maybe they just got a call that their kid is sick. Maybe they're distracted by something urgent. Maybe they simply made a mistake. But you attributed their behavior to their character, not to their circumstances. This is the fundamental attribution error. You blame people's internal qualities for their behavior, even though behavior is usually determined by situation. But when you do something wrong, you immediately think of circumstances. I was stressed. I didn't have all the information. I was tired. You give yourself situational explanations. You give others character explanations. Here's what's insidious. This destroys relationships. Someone does something hurtful. You think they're a bad person. You withdraw. You build resentment. But they were probably just in a bad situation. And now your withdrawal creates another bad situation for them. The paradox is this: the people with the deepest relationships are the ones who default to situational explanations. They assume their partner did something hurtful because they're stressed, not because they're cruel. They assume a friend forgot them because they're overwhelmed, not because they don't care. This creates forgiveness. This creates compassion. This creates connection. Tonight, who are you attributing bad character to? Can you imagine their situation instead? Can you give them the same grace you give yourself? Law 42, the attraction illusion. You're more attracted to people when they like you. You're not sure about someone, you're kind of interested. But then you find out they're really interested in you. Suddenly, they become more attractive. It's not that they changed, but your perception did. This is the attraction illusion. You're attracted to the fact that someone is attracted to you. It feels like love, but it's actually just responsiveness to being valued. Here's how it's insidious. You end up with people you're not actually that attracted to, just people who liked you. And then you're surprised when the relationship doesn't have passion. But there was no passion to begin with. You confused validation with attraction. The paradox is this: the relationships that last are the ones where there's mutual, genuine attraction, not just responsiveness to being wanted. But those relationships are rarer because they require two people to actually be drawn to each other, not just drawn to being chosen. Tonight, in your closest relationships, are you there because of genuine attraction, or because you were attracted to being wanted? Law 43, the illusion of asymmetric insight. You think you know people better than they know you. You think you understand your partner. You know how they think. You can predict what they'll do. But they don't understand you the same way. They're always surprised by your actions. They don't really know you. This is the illusion of asymmetric insight. You think you have deeper knowledge of others than they have of you. But the reality is usually symmetrical. They also think they understand you better than you understand them. So you're both operating with false certainty about people you don't actually understand. Here's what's insidious. This creates disconnection. You're not curious about them because you think you already understand. They're not curious about you for the same reason. So you never actually connect. You just live in parallel understandings that are mostly wrong. The paradox is this: real intimacy requires recognizing that you don't actually know anyone, not perfectly, and that's okay. The moment you accept that you don't understand your partner, you become curious again. You start asking questions. You start connecting. Tonight, who do you think you fully understand? Can you admit you're probably wrong? Can you ask them something with genuine curiosity? Law 44, the Reciprocity Effect. You feel obligated to return what others give you. Someone does something nice for you. Now you feel like you owe them. You feel obligated to do something nice back. This is reciprocity, and it's powerful. Salespeople know this. They give you a free sample. Now you feel obligated to buy. They've created a debt. Here's what's insidious. You can be manipulated through reciprocity. Someone does something small. You feel obligated. You end up doing something much bigger. And you're not even conscious of the manipulation. You just feel like it's the right thing to do. The paradox is this: reciprocity is how humans build community. It's how trust develops. It's beautiful when it's genuine. But it's also how you get trapped, by people who understand the mechanism and weaponize it. The people most free from manipulation are the ones who have learned to recognize when they're experiencing obligation. They can accept a gift without automatically feeling they owe something back. Tonight, who do you feel obligated to? Did they create that obligation intentionally? Can you distinguish between genuine reciprocity and manufactured obligation? Law 45, the Pratfall Effect. You like people more when they make mistakes. Someone is perfect. They never mess up. You're impressed but not necessarily drawn to them. Someone makes a mistake. They stumble. They admit they don't know something. Suddenly they seem human and you like them more. This is the Pratfall Effect. You're attracted to people who are flawed and willing to show it. Here's what's insidious. Many people try to hide their flaws. They perform perfection, and it makes people less drawn to them. But if they were willing to be human, to admit mistakes, to show vulnerability, they'd be more likable. The paradox is this: the people most afraid to show weakness are the ones who most need to, because their attempt at perfection is what makes them seem distant. But the people willing to be flawed, they seem trustworthy, they seem real, they seem human. Tonight, where are you performing perfection when you could be showing humanity? What mistake could you admit that would actually make someone like you more? Law 46, the in-group bias. You think your group is better than other groups. You support a sports team. They're the good ones. Other teams are inferior. You belong to a political party. Your people are right. The other people are wrong. You belong to a religion. Your beliefs are true. Other beliefs are false. This is in-group bias. You automatically favor the group you belong to and disfavor groups you don't belong to. Here's what's insidious. This is tribal, and it's automatic. You don't consciously decide to do it. Your brain just assumes your group is better. This is how prejudice and conflict persist, not because people are consciously hateful, but because their brains automatically favor their group. The paradox is this: the people least susceptible to in-group bias are the ones who have belonged to multiple groups. They've learned that every group thinks they're right. Every group thinks their way is better. The truth is more complicated. Every group has something to teach, and every group is wrong about some things. Tonight, what groups do you belong to? How much of your loyalty is genuine, and how much is just automatic in-group bias? Law 47, the Backfire Effect extended. When people feel attacked, they dig in deeper. You're trying to convince someone of something. You provide evidence. You think you're being logical and helpful. But they perceive it as an attack. Their identity is being questioned, so they defend. They don't examine the evidence. They attack back. They find counter-evidence. They become more extreme. And you're frustrated because you were trying to help. Here's what's insidious. The more you push, the more they push back. The backfire effect is real. Directly confronting someone's belief makes them more entrenched. The paradox is this: if you want to actually change someone's mind, you can't use evidence and logic as your primary tools. You have to start with empathy. You have to acknowledge that their belief makes sense from their perspective. You have to show that you understand why they believe what they believe. Only then can you gently introduce new perspectives. But this requires patience and humility, and most people don't have those. Tonight, who are you trying to convince? Are you attacking their identity, or are you trying to understand where they're coming from? Law 48, the halo effect. One good trait makes you think everything about someone is good. Someone is attractive, so you assume they're intelligent, kind, and trustworthy. Someone is intelligent, so you assume they're good at everything. This is the halo effect. One positive quality creates a halo that makes you assume other positive qualities. Here's what's insidious. Attractive people and intelligent people get away with things others can't, because people assume they're good. But they're not necessarily good. They're just attractive or intelligent. And this creates massive blind spots. You're attracted to someone with a good job and nice smile, so you assume they're trustworthy, but they're actually manipulative. The paradox is this: the people who see others most clearly are the ones who have learned to separate individual traits. They can see someone is attractive without assuming they're also kind. They can see someone is intelligent without assuming they're also ethical. They judge each quality independently. This prevents them from being manipulated. Tonight, who are you giving a halo to? What negative traits are you ignoring because of one positive trait? Can you see them more clearly? Law 49, the just world hypothesis. You believe bad things happen to bad people. Someone got sick, they must have deserved it, they must have done something wrong. Someone got rich, they must be smart and hardworking. This is the just world hypothesis. You believe the world is fair. Bad things happen to bad people. Good things happen to good people. But the world isn't fair. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. Luck is involved. Timing is involved. Circumstances are involved. Here's what's insidious. This belief makes you blame victims. Someone got mugged. They must have been in a bad neighborhood. They must have done something wrong. This makes you feel safer if you're good. Bad things won't happen to you. But it's a lie. Bad things can happen to good people, and accepting that is terrifying. The paradox is this: the people who are actually safe are not the ones who believe in just world. They're the ones who have accepted randomness, who have accepted that sometimes bad luck happens. And because they've accepted that, they protect themselves. They take precautions. They don't assume justice will protect them. Tonight, where are you blaming people for things that might just be bad luck? Can you accept that the world is less fair than you'd like it to be? Law 50, the meaning crisis. Humans need meaning, so you'll create it wherever you can. You have experiences, you have events, you have a life. Your brain takes all of it and creates a story, a narrative, a meaning. But the meaning isn't inherent. It's created. You created it. And different people create different meanings from the same life. One person loses a job and it's a tragedy. Another person loses a job and it's an opportunity. Same event, different meaning. Here's what's insidious. You're addicted to meaning. You need meaning to survive psychologically, so you'll create it even when it's not there. You'll find meaning in suffering, in loss, in failure. You'll tell yourself the story that makes it bearable. But these stories can be false, and false stories lead to false conclusions. The paradox is this: the people who live best are not the ones who have found the meaning. There is no universal meaning. The people who live best are the ones who have accepted the meaninglessness and chosen to create meaning anyway. They know there's no inherent purpose, but they choose what their life means. They choose what matters to them. This is radical freedom and radical responsibility. Because once you accept that meaning is created, not found, you're responsible for creating it. You can't blame anyone else for your meaning. You can't wait for the universe to reveal it. You have to choose. Tonight, ask yourself, what meaning am I creating about my life? Did I choose this meaning, or did I inherit it, and would I choose it again? As we come to the end of this journey through 50 invisible laws, let me tell you something. You are not broken. You have a brain that was designed for survival, not for happiness. You have nervous system patterns inherited from ancestors who needed to be paranoid, tribal, and conformist to stay alive. That brain served them well. It kept them alive. But that same brain is now the source of your suffering, because you're not trying to survive anymore. You're trying to live, and those are different things. All of these laws, social proof, sunk costs, planning fallacy, loss aversion, they're not character flaws. They're features of a survival machine. The question isn't, how do I fix my brain? The question is, how do I work with my brain to create a life that's actually worth living? And the answer is awareness. The moment you see a law operating, it loses some of its power. The moment you recognize you're defaulting instead of choosing, you have a choice. This doesn't mean you'll always choose well. You're still human, you're still limited, you'll still make mistakes. But you'll make them consciously, and that's everything. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, know this: you are aware now. You see the invisible architecture of how you think. You understand the patterns. That awareness is your freedom. Use it well. And sleep knowing that tomorrow you get to choose again.